Hello everyone, it's me, Mr. Gowlett. Yet again, we are back for part 3 of Odyesseus. I do hope you're enjoying it as much as I am. Unfortunately, my video last time seemed to have cut out quite sharply, so I do apologise. There was a page that I ended up reading, but obviously it forgot to record, or I just stopped pressing it. I don't know what happened. So we're going to continue. So, let's begin and let's finish Odyesseus. Then Odyesseus knew that Circe had not lied. He also knew that a worse danger lay ahead, Charybdis. Charybdis was more than a whirlpool. It was a great sucking mouth in the face of the ocean, in the shadow of a cliff. Twice a day it sucked in everything floating within 7 miles of it. Twice a day it spewed out the wreckage. But thanks to the Circe's advice, the men of Ithaca raced past Charybdis at the safest time of day and came to no harm at all. But the sea god Poseidon's revenge was not over. His storm horses drove the Odyssey back towards that terrible gaping mouth. The soldiers just had time to say goodbye to each other before their ship slipped over the glassy rim. For a moment it hung in midair. Odysseus leapt onto the stem, sprang upwards and caught a hold of a little bush growing on the cliff. Down fell his ship and men into the raging whirlpool beneath. For 4 aching hours Odysseus clung to that bush, soaked with spray and deafened by roaring water. Then the tide filled Charybdis and stilled the whirling water. Broken pieces of his ship floated to the surface. Odysseus dropped down, clung to a plank of wood and floated away across the sea. For 9 more years Odysseus had to travel the oceans from island to island, until at last he found help and friendship, and a ship to carry him home to Ithaca. Meanwhile, Penelope waited patiently for her husband's return. Each day she watched at the window, but Odysseus did not come. Others did. Idle, greedy young princes came calling on Penelope. Odysseus must have drowned on his way home from the war, they said. Marry one of us instead. I will wait a little longer, said Penelope politely. But as the years passed, the visitors became less charming. Choose, lady, or we will for you. Ithaca needs a king. Very well, said Penelope at last. Let me weave a wedding veil. When it's finished, I will choose a new husband. But although Penelope worked all day at her loom, the veil never seemed to be finished. Months passed, and it had hardly grown at all. And why? Because every night, while her unwelcome suitors were snoring, Penelope crept out of bed and unpicked her needlework. Then one night she was found out. One of the suitors found her at her loom, unpicking the threads by candlelight. Enough, he snarled. Tomorrow you'll choose a husband, like it or not. The ship bound for Ithaca with Odysseus aboard set sail while Poseidon was dozing. Imagine the sea god's fury when he woke up and saw Odysseus, his hated enemy, sleeping safe and sound on an Ithacan beach. Poseidon punished the ship that had helped Odysseus reach home, seized it and cursed it into stone. There it stands to this day, a narrow ship of rock with stone rowers bending over stony oars. The seagulls perch on it and shriek. The day came when Penelope must choose a new husband from among the greedy princes. A great feast was arranged, but the unhappy queen ate none of the food laid in front of her. If only he had come, she thought. The suitors crammed their mouths and drank themselves drunk. Outside in the yard lay an old dog, Odysseus's old hunting dog. He got nothing but kicks and cuffs from the princes. His bones showed through his dull coat, and his eyes were blind. Just then, a ragged old beggar shuffled into the yard and sat down. The dog raised his head and sniffed, and got up and tottered towards the sound of a familiar voice. Hello, old friend. You remember me, don't you? The dog laid his head in the beggar's lap, and content at last, died with his head between loving hands. The beggar shuffled into the hall where the feast was in progress. At one chair after another he begged a bite of food, a sup of wine. I'm a poor unfortunate sailor, shipwrecked on these shores. Spare me a little something. But the suitors drove him away with slaps and kicks. Only Queen Penelope asked him to eat the food set in her place. Somewhere on his journeys, my husband Odysseus may have asked for help from strangers. I hope he found at least one heart to pity him. Odysseus, jeered the suitors, he's dead and gone. Choose. It's time for you to choose one of us. And they thumped the table. Choose, choose, choose. Very well, Penelope spoke with quiet dignity. You shall compete for my hand. And this task I set, put your axes on the table, head down. See how each one has a thong on its handle? Well, I shall marry the first man who can fire an arrow directly through all those thongs, using the dead king's own bow. The suitors swept the food off the table. They snatched Odysseus' hunting bow off the wall and struggled to string it. But though they grunted and strained, they could not bend the bow. Allow me, said the beggar, and bent it as though it were willow, and strung it. The suitors kicked him into a corner. Then each tried to fire an arrow through the thongs of the axes. They all failed and cursed and argued. The axes tumbled 100 times. Penelope got up to leave the hall. May I try, said the beggar. Get away, you filthy creature, said a prince. This contest is for the hand of a queen. Let him try, said Penelope. I'd as soon marry a penniless beggar as any of you, and she closed the door behind her. But once the beggar had a bow in his hands, he did not take aim on the axes. He leapt onto the table and fired one after another into the hearts of the suitors. Hear this and die, he said. Odysseus has returned to rid this palace of rats and toads. Penelope heard the fighting and thought the suitors must be quarrelling again. At last, silence. Her son came running to find her. He's outside. He's killed them all, mother. He's home. After all these years, father has come home. Penelope went down to the hall. There stood Odysseus, his disguise thrown off and his face washed. Welcome, sir, she said rather coldly. You must be weary. I'll have a bed made up for you. Odysseus's heart sank. Had Penelope's love died during the 20 years he had been away? I'd rather sleep in my own bed, lady, he said timidly. Very well, I shall have it carried to the east chamber. A spark twinkled in Odysseus's eye. How could you move our bed when it's carved out of the very tree which holds up the room of this palace? When Penelope heard his words, she fell into Odysseus' arms and kissed him. I to be sure it was you, and only you could know about our bed, she said. Welcome home, Odysseus. Now that's a really nice end to that story, so I hope you enjoyed that one. It was quite a long story, but it was a really, really interesting story. So much happening in there. So, tomorrow we shall read, if you remember the story of Prometheus, there is a small story there, which I think will end the week quite nicely, and hopefully it's a nice story. I've not read it yet, but I'm hoping so. But until then, everybody, hope you stay nice and safe, and I shall see you tomorrow. Goodbye, everybody.